Welcome to the Book of Urm, Tales of Piecora, the Haunted Fortress. Chapter 8, Blackrock. Blackrock. "I found it," Piecora said quietly, "and I see them." Ravses and Piecora sat huddled beneath a tall arch at least 2 stories high within the side of Judiusubideorum, the Alagostan Colosseum for the Canonian Games. It was just after midnight, Ravsese surmised, although admittedly she had lost all concept of time since arriving in the city. Light snow fell gently onto the nearby paved street, leaving a pale dusting like cornflour over everything. Distant sounds of revelry echoed all around them, as if causing the lazy sway of the banners overhead. The sky had become mottled with white clouds, backlit by the still rising full red moon, cloaking the city in a deep red crimson. Ravses shivered. "I can barely see anything in this light. What do you mean? You found it?" She saw that Piecora crouched beside her like a cat balancing on top of a post, staring straight ahead into nothing. But on closer inspection, she saw that Piecora's eyes shifted constantly, ever so slightly, as if in a waking fitful dream. "The hole where the mansion was," Piecora said. "And there's Ortor and Valesh together." Then Piecora snickered and grinned. "Little devil, he's looking right back at me." Ravsese was baffled at all of this. "Whatever do you mean?" she asked. Piecora blinked several times, and then looked at Ravsese as if coming out of a trance. "Here, take my hand, and we'll go to them. Your boy and the girl are safe. Have you met Hero? I don't believe you have been formally introduced." Ravsese could tell that Piecora was feeling better now that she was outside and away from all the crowds of bricklayers, as she seemed fond of calling the Canonians. "Hero and I share a soul," Piecora said as they walked quietly along a large, wide paved road down a steep hill. "It's not easy to explain except that we Sienjans, I've come to learn, are a broken people. Our souls are split between us and the animals of our lands. This probably explains much regarding Sienjan behaviour and our societal dependency on the hermit. Ask me another time who that is. But regarding Hero, we found each other one day when I left Sienya to look for my childhood friend, a Banwa elf who had left for her spirit journey but never returned. One day, I woke up in my camp, and there he was, Hero, standing on the ground across the remains of the fire, staring back at me. It feels as if you are staring back at yourself. Not a reflection, like in a mirror, but rather you share their perspective and they yours, and back and forth it goes infinitely. Our soul was joined that day, shared between each of our vessels. That is why it is called soul bond. We became whole, unified as a single identity and awareness." Ravses stared at her boots stepping in front of her as she thought about Piecora's words. She could not relate at all to any of it, but tried to imagine how it must feel, just so she could understand better. Her feet left perfect prints in the dry dusting of snow on the ground, and she wondered how long it might take before they were covered over completely, losing their way back to the bishop's lament. "That is beautiful," she said. "The Sienjans, the Banwar, you intrigue me more with each telling." She felt Piecora squeeze her hand. "I am glad you feel that way," Piecora said. "I have found it is a rare sentiment to think of it positively, or even believe it to be true. It is beyond the comprehension of my people. They don't see it within themselves. They cannot accept it. I went back to them with Hero, and tried to show them, tried to explain to them that they are half asleep, and this explains the emptiness that Sienjans all feel. So long as their soul's other half is lost among the animals of Sienja, they will never know their true selves, nor feel fulfillment. Only by finding their soul bond animal, unique to each of them, can they fully realize who they are." So many questions burned within Ravses's mind, she couldn't help asking her companion, How did this come to pass for the Xianjians? You are the first people I've encountered afflicted with this predicament." Piecora took a while before answering soberly. "The hermit did this to us, when he made us." "Made you?" Ravsis asked. "Made our people, our society, in the very beginning before our nation was formed," said Piecora. "He is our religious leader, and he guides us in all things. He speaks quietly with Tenor, the hill and valley king who leads us, and directs everything that our king does. Every year we go on our pilgrimage to the hermit's cave in the side of the mountains, and we camp there for weeks as the hermit speaks wisdom and prophecy to us. He even determines if there is love between two people, for only with his blessing can they marry. He controls all facets of Xianjian life, separating our souls and distilling them among the animals of our lands, where it would be nearly impossible for anyone to discover, is how he so easily controls us, and how we so easily follow him, even for things as basic and natural as love." Piecora grunted and spat on the ground. "He sounds like a villain," said Ravsiza. "He is a druid," said Piecora, "which makes him both villain and hero depending on his mood and how he perceives the balance on any given day. He is ancient and powerful, one of the 3 hierophants who lead the druidic community across the world. Their orders are like concentric rings of status and influence, and the 3 hierophants stand alone within the innermost ring. Their authority radiates outward, across all lesser rings of station." "One of 3? Who are the others? Why do they let him do this to your people?" Ravsis asked. "I don't know who the others are. I only know this about the hermit because I met him once. Not on pilgrimage, as I never went on a pilgrimage. But he came to me during a recent adventure. Much was said during that meeting, and I understand many things now that I couldn't before. I think if I were to ever see him again, I would attempt to slay him, as foolish as that is, as I know it would cost me my life. But I don't think I'd be able to help myself. I hate him and his hold over my people more than I care for my own survival, and thankfully Hero agrees." "But if his concern is balance, why does he do such evil to your people?" Ravsis asked. "Because to him it is not evil. Look at your own people, the Unskavia. Your oppressors think what they do to you is not evil. Muthan society thinks it is by grace and kindness and accountability that they allow you to live, although in a cage. It is similar with the Xianjians, except my people do not even know of their own plight. They simply worship the man who enthralls them. Thus their prison has no need of walls. It is in their minds and hearts." Ravsizi slowly drew a finger down one of the marks of Silijan, ink on her cheek, as she thought about Piecora's story. Merely a few weeks ago, she had no idea how vast, complex and wonderful the world truly was, despite being a voracious reader. But then, if Muth controlled what was available or allowed to be read, then no wonder she knew so little about anything beyond her immediate life in Veklische Mansion. In fact, she never even questioned it. Whatever she knew about the world was set within limitations she could never perceive, governed by those who controlled the distribution of knowledge and stifled her curiosity without her awareness. How can one see anything beyond the boundaries that surround them? She felt as if a cork had been unplugged inside her, and she was in awe of everything now open to her mind since meeting the Xianjian guide. They continued on through the night, crossing large paved market squares and navigating ever increasingly narrower streets and alleys until they finally came upon a huge emptiness surrounded by old, dilapidated buildings and collapsed streets. A dark crater filled the space where an entire fortress once stood long ago, its depths disappearing into darkness far below. Howling winds swirled over the crater, whipping up snow in animated gusts like phantoms at play. Ravsis clutched Piecora's arm as she lost balance from the overwhelming sight. "The winds gather here to hold council. We stand by their judgment," she cried fearfully as Muthan superstitions took over. Down there, said Piecora, pointing down into the crater at a small flickering light. Her black braided hair whipped in the whistling breeze like they were living appendages. See the light? Hierro is with them. They seem to be playing a game. Are you able to climb? Shall I carry you? I can do it, I think, said Ravsés, unsure about her physical capability, but doubly sure about her commitment to reach her son. Slowly they made their way down into the crater, moving like two tiny insects within the city's gaping wound. All around the hole were the exposed guts of Alagost's ancient infrastructure. A gigantic sewer pipe, large enough to fit a horse and carriage, hung in the air from beneath twisted slabs of stone and earth in the side of the crater, while depositing a cascading waterfall of dirty water into the unseen depths below. Bats flew in circles within the crater beneath the turbulent winds. All around them droned a melodic chorus of long groans, creaks, cracks, and stutters from the crumbling sides of the crater. Finally, Ravsés and Piecora found themselves on the same ledge as the flickering light that Piecora pointed at from above, and looking up, Ravsés was amazed at how far they had come in what seemed like a short amount of time. There, in the sky, partially obscured by clouds and half hidden behind the jagged lip of the crater, was the red moon staring back down at them. "Muma!" she heard from behind her, and as she turned to look, Auta came running and jumped into her arms. Ravsés fell to her knees and embraced her son warmly and tightly, feeling herself whole again. As she rejoiced in reuniting with her son, she suddenly wondered if this is how Piecora felt when she was with Hierro. Looking up with tears in her eyes, she saw Piecora and her antlers of stag silhouetted against the fading red moon. Kneeling, Piecora embraced them both and kissed each of them on the head. "Whatever made you leave the room, Autor?" asked Ravsés finally, pulling herself away and checking him for any wounds. "She wanted to show me her home and some of her toys," said Autor. He then broke free of her and ran back to the flickering lamplight, shouting, "Come see what we are playing! I'm winning!" They followed him inside a ramshackle doorway in the side of the crater with a lamp hanging by a hook beside it. There they found a modest dwelling containing various found objects from the city. A lush but filthy carpet of a white bear splayed in the middle of the floor. A bronze statue of a woman posed as if giving a lecture with half her face missing. A simple wooden barrel for washing. An ornate canopy bed with white silk sheets and torn translucent drapery that hung still from the canopy. A lamp was lit inside on a small table in the middle of the room, illuminating piles of various loose items against the surrounding patchwork walls. On the table was a marble square board painted with black and white squares. Little figurines in black and white stood within the squares on the board, and adjacent to the board was a red uncut gem the size of Ravsés's palm. Standing next to the table and facing them as if welcoming an entourage of noble dilettantes, stood Valèche Callistico, their hostess from the Bishop's Lament. She wore a simple, ill-fitted white nightshirt that was too large for her. Perhaps it once belonged to the Queen herself, but now it was stained and torn along the bottom around her ankles. The neckline, once trimmed with gold filigree designs, fell around her shoulders loosely, which she constantly had to adjust. She bowed to them formally and said, "Welcome to Domiusithre Entia Flus Tumai, home of the harp and wave, mansion of House Callistico. My home. I am at your service." "Aren't you a little late for your shift?" growled Piecora. Valèche quickly snapped back to full stature, her straight straw-like hair flying upward, and she huffed. "You are displeased, I can see. You were missing from the room when I came to visit, so I talked to Autor. He's very chatty when adults aren't around. He showed me his rat-catcher toy, and I wanted to show him some of mine that I've collected. I swear we would return in the morning. As you can see, we are plenty fine, milady. May I interest you in a beverage?" Orta planted himself into the large wooden and leather-upholstered chair that would be more fitting in the dining hall of a land baron. The leather was torn here and there, and several rivets were missing. "It's your turn," he called to Valesh as he stared at the board. Valesh looked at the board, then back at Ravzes and said, "Hoping you don't mind, milady, I've taught him chess. He very quickly picked it up. In fact, I think he's swindling me. Winner of this game gets that piece of Mutton Blackrock. Worthless to me, but he seems excited about it for some reason. I think the next game he might try to take my home." Ravzes, flooded with conflicting questions and responses, uttered meekly, "Chess? You taught him chess?" Ravzes walked over to the table and picked up the gem. Strangely, her fingers didn't touch the gem itself, but rather hovered around the edges of it, as if it floated between her fingers. Yet she felt a coarse, dry surface, and looking at her fingers, she saw them stained with black charcoal soot. Somehow she saw something different here within this black rock, and so did Artur. Its outer shell was invisible to her, and yet it left black charcoal stains on her fingers, just as Mutton Blackrock would. "That's the rock, milady. Don't know why he wants it, but he's being wicked clever this match to win it." "It's not a rock," whined Artur loudly. "It's a big red glassy rock. It's pretty, and it's a present for Mumi." Ravzes set the rock back down onto the table with two separate curiosities overtaking her thoughts. One was the obvious. Why could only she and Artur see the red gem within the Mutton Blackrock? But the other was this. How was Artur speaking the low Canonian common tongue so effortlessly? He barely said 2 words since they arrived, and now it's as if he's lived here his whole life. Ravzes learned it from months of reading about Canonia before her voyage across the Salt Sea, though admittedly, once she arrived, she seemed to pick it up naturally. But she wasn't prepared to hear her son speaking the common speech so fluently. She knelt down beside Artur and kissed his cheek. "I see it, Artur, the shiny red gem. I think only you and I do, so it's our secret. It's beautiful. Now, how did you learn all of this so quickly?" But Artur was fixated on the figurines on the chessboard. Ravzes never learned to play chess, as it was only played by those above her station. Dorglir once promised to teach her after they married, but obviously that never happened. Valesh sat back down and slouched her shoulders while looking at the board glumly. "It's almost over now. He has me boxed in. Probably 3 or 4 more moves and it's mate. I think he's aware of that, and he's just trying to decide which moves are most painful for me. You are a nasty chess player, Artur. Someone should teach you etiquette when your opponent concedes." Just then, Ravzes made another observation. Neither Artur nor her had their heads covered. Here they were inside this impoverished human child's home, and Valesh didn't seem to even notice the horns, eyes or tails of Ravzes and Artur, or if she did, she didn't seem to mind at all. Ravzes suddenly felt a brief, powerful sense of déjà vu, as it reminded her of being in Eindungzirk with the surrogate family. Nobody felt the need to hide themselves. "How long have you been living here?" asked Piecora as she strode around the room, picking up loose items and casually tossing them back into the piles. "Careful with that, please," said Valesh, as Piecora let fall an ornate silver spoon. "When my parents died, that's when I moved back to our rightful home. I wish they were here so they could see how far I've come. I have aspirations, you know. All of this will be ours again. One day." "You'll have to wrest it from Einden Vanders, then. From my understanding, he owns all of this, apparently. You know who that is?" asked Piecora. "Of course I know who that is," said Valesh indignantly. "Why do you think I work at the bishop?" "Why do you work at the bishop?" asked Artur. Ravzes marvelled at her son, wondering if he even knew what he was asking or just wanted to participate in the conversation like a meowing cat between chatterers. "Because one day he will not make it home to covetous Fox Lodge, and I will take over everything," said Valesh gloomily as she pouted at the game board. "Will you go already? You really are gloating right now, Orta, I can tell. It's not nice." "What is Covetous Fox Lodge?" asked Ravsesa. "That's where Eindon lives," said Valesh. "I follow him home from time to time. He never knows about it, though." "And where is it?" asked Ravsesa. "Out of the city, between here and Knightsport, but you can't see it from the Silver Gallop. It's far from the road and hidden by hills and trees." "He lives in the Sleepless Hills?" asked Piecora. "No, of course not," snapped Valesh. "It's north of the road, not south." Ravsesa cleared her throat. Are you saying, Valesh, that you are planning to retire, the Lord Eindon Vandus?" "In a manner of speaking," said Valesh, now sulking. "Probably with the help of the Talons. I'm friends with Ashovai. Really, Artor. I'll show you another toy if you just end the game already. Gods!" Ravsesi stood up and looked at Piecora, who met her gaze with a shrug of her shoulders. Piecora then stood in the exit overlooking the crater and said after a moment, "You ever go down there, Valesh?" Valesh stood up grumpily and fell onto the large canopy bed. "Sometimes, but it goes down really far and gets really scary, so I haven't gone all the way. I've seen others go down there, all the way down, and they never come back up. I think things live way down there. One day, though, I'll clean it all out, build it all back up, bring our family back, live here again, but proper like." Her voice drifted off as if she were falling asleep, and Ravsesa couldn't help but feel her heart weep for the child. A loud, deep, stuttering groan erupted all around them, and the floor beneath their feet shuddered before suddenly falling away completely. Ravsesa heard a brief scream from Valesh before she became airborne. Artor jumped from his chair and into Ravsesa's arms, clutching her with his arms and legs, as they both tumbled down into darkness. They landed onto a steep, rattling incline and slid further down until being kicked back into the air, only to collide with a falling platform disintegrating around the edges. Shafts of red moonlight filtered through thick clouds of dust, surrounding Ravsesa and her son as they fell further into the abyss, careening off falling pillars and crumbling slabs of stone, until sliding down into a slowly descending circular sewer pipe that broke away from its mooring high above Valesh's little home. The huge pipe landed hard on its open end at an angle, and then slowly fell to the side, decreasing Ravsesa's sliding angle of descent while it fell, until finally she slid all the way to the open bottom just as the pipe landed on its side with a thunderous boom that kicked up mud and debris high into the air. Miraculously, aside from several scrapes and bruises, neither Ravsesa nor Orta were hurt as they tumbled into the mud out of the circular pipe. As they did, the stone pipe cracked longitudinally down the middle, split, and with a deafening sound like a falling building, the pipe collapsed in on itself, leaving a mountain of broken pieces of curved stone behind Ravsesa and her son. Huge pieces of earth, stone, and infrastructure fell all around them, and quickly gathering up Artor, Ravsesa ran in whatever direction she happened to be facing, until diving headlong into an earthen tunnel. Behind her came down the whole side of the crater that once housed Valesh's home, sealing Ravsesa and her son within the small tunnel. But the force of the collapse blasted them further down the tunnel until it fell steeply, and both Ravsesa and Artor tumbled like ragdolls down the steep tunnel until they were cast out onto a flat, polished wooden floor with perfectly joined floorboards, treated with a beautiful, dark, waxy stain that revealed Ravsesa's own reflection back at her as she finally came to a stop. It took her several moments to collect herself and clear her mind as she stared at her reflection in the wooden floor. Her hair was everywhere, looking like a brenzage candy cloud, which is spun on a spool and eaten from a stick. Pieces of debris and dust finally subsided around her as she looked up to see Artor slowly rising to his knees. To her delight, he looked unharmed, save for some cuts here and there. However, his once beautiful outfit, handpicked by Cassandra in Knightsport, was now covered in dirt and mud, with one sleeve on his jacket hanging around his elbow. The child stared all around him with his mouth agape, and Ravsez lifted her eyes to see what held his attention. They were in a gigantic hall with a gigantic crystal chandelier lit with hundreds of candles hanging overhead from a muralled ceiling at least 2 stories high. A long wooden table, ornately carved and polished with the same veneer as the floor, stood nearby in the middle of the room. Shelves set within the walls and filled with books lined one wall. Another wall featured a large empty hearth of white marble, and next to the hearth was a small bar with hundreds of glass bottles of various sizes and shapes and colours. The wall behind them was completely demolished, but not recently, according to Ravsez's observation. Rather, it appeared as if the room had collapsed a long time ago, leaving behind the small tunnel that she and Autor just escaped from. For the moment, all was still and quiet as Ravsez slowly rose to her knees. Both she and Autor stared blankly at what appeared to be a richly appointed dining hall reserved for the wealthiest of nobles, far beneath the ruins of the crater and the city of Alagost. Then there was a shudder, and the place shook. The chandelier swayed and several candles were extinguished. The white marble hearth broke and spilled into the room as a deluge of earth rolled onto the floor, and from within the heaving pile of debris came the large bed from Valesh's home. It scraped across the floor until finally coming to rest against the large dining table. The bed's canopy was gone, broken away from the 4 splintered posts on each of the bed's corners. In the middle of the bed lay Piecora, covered in dirt and mud, and as she lifted herself from the battered mattress, Valesh peeked out from her fetal position. The room shuddered again, and bits of plaster fell from the ceiling. Piecora jumped from the bed, looked around wildly, and then ran to Autor, lifting him up and checking him as if he were a puppy who soiled itself. Then she came quickly over to Ravsez while tucking Autor under her arm. She grabbed Ravsez by the arm and pulled her up roughly, looking her over from her feet to her head. "Can you walk? Move your limbs. Do you have movement? How is your head? Are you sick to your stomach? Can you breathe?" Piecora rattled off without waiting for a reply. Finally, Ravsez said groggily, "I'm fine. We're fine, I think. A little dislodged, maybe." Piecora's eyes locked onto Ravsez's forehead. "You are cut deeply," Piecora said, as she felt around Ravsez's hairline, pinching here and there. "Come over to the bed." Piecora dragged Ravsez and Autor to the dirt-covered bed as Valesh was slowly sitting up. Ravsez's head was throbbing painfully, feeling as if it might split open any moment, and her vision was dark around the edges. Sounds around her were muffled, like they were coming from another room. She went to sit on the bed, but missed it entirely, and instead flopped onto the floor beside the bed and used it as a backrest. She heard tearing sounds as she felt herself slowly fading into sleep, before something was being wrapped around her head tightly. "I need you to keep your head up and straight and do not sleep. Stay awake. Do you hear me?" came the words distantly. She opened her eyes and saw Piecora right in front of her, holding her face with her hands. "Autor, come talk to your mother. Keep her awake. Understand me? Don't let her sleep." Piecora barked as she stood back up. "Valesh, can you walk? Good. Help me look around. We need to get our bearings and find something for Ravsez. Autor, keep talking to her. Good boy. Valesh, let's go." Then Ravsez drifted into blissfully black slumber, relinquishing all of herself to whatever the fates might have in store for her. Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.